Hello, you're listening to Sending the Experts with Georgina Durrant. This podcast is all about teaching and supporting children and young people with special educational needs and disabilities, SEND. My name is Georgina Durrant. I'm the host of this podcast brought to you by Twinkle SEND. As a former teacher in Senko myself, I wanted to create a platform to share some of the amazing things that my guests are doing to support learners with SEND. So whether you're listening on your commute, tuning in whilst walking your dog, or curled up on the sofa with a nice cup of coffee, thank you so much for joining us. In this episode, I am delighted to be joined by Colin Foley. Colin Foley is the training director of the ADHD Foundation, the largest ADHD charity in Europe. Following a 25-year teaching career, wow, including 10 years in school leadership, Colin has led the training team at the ADHD Foundation to become the largest provider of training for professionals on ADHD in the UK, working with over 13,000 professionals from a range of sectors in the last year. Their training sessions are rooted in taking a strength-based approach to neurodiversity, understanding the conditions, how they overlap, the impact on neurodiversity on people's lived experience, as well as empowering educators, employers, line managers, service providers, families, and people with ADHD with evidence-based strategies for living well and being successful in education and in the workplace. Brilliant, Colin. This sounds fantastic. Lovely to have you on here. Thank you for coming on.
So, Georgina, it's my pleasure to be here. Thank you very much for asking me.
Fabulous. So could you tell us a little bit more about your background? It sounds fantastic. A 25-year teaching career is very impressive. So tell us more about your background, what led you in particular, because I'm always interested in this, what led you in particular into working for the ADHD Foundation? Do you have like a personal interest in ADHD? Okay. What led you down that path?
Yeah, thanks very much for highlighting how old I am there, Georgina. No problem at all. I think I was a drama teacher, Georgina, and so I started in 1989. And of course, I was teaching in big spaces with no desks. Was doing no writing, really, no reading, particularly. My lessons were all kind of on your feet, on the move, loads of talk, lots of making it up on the spot, which, of course, kids with ADHD in particular absolutely thrive in those environments. And I think I was sat in the staff room listening to teachers talking about the challenges that they were having with certain students, and teachers much older than myself at the time, much more experienced. And I'm thinking, well, I'm not having those challenges. What could be going on here? It can't be that I'm a better teacher because I've only been doing it for a year or two and you've been at it for years. And that's what started to get me interested really in kind of SEN and different ways in which young people learn. The first promotion I ever got, Georgina, was in the first school I worked in, was they gave me an enhancement point. I don't know if you remember those days, as a skills developer, because they recognised the school at the time that I was working in, that getting kids working collaboratively and collectively, how you structure group work and set it up, how do you create those episodic memory moments in sessions was happening, in a subject like drama, and they wanted me to kind of develop this across the whole school. So that's where my interest came, and then I knew people at the foundation. I'd done some work with them, done some performance work with students for events, and that's when they kind of asked me to come and work because they wanted to develop training. And I've never looked back, Georgina. It's 10 years for me.
Longer than that.
Next April, and I mean, we could talk about this all day, couldn't we, Georgina? But it's so interesting, and it feels like, particularly the last 5 years, feels like we are seeing this seismic shift in people's perceptions and knowledge and awareness and comfort around neurodiversity. You may have experienced this yourself, Georgina. Going into schools now feels like you're knocking at an open door, and people are very, very comfortable to talk about neurodiversity. So that's a little bit about my background and what I do, but also what has happened really, particularly over the last 5 years, is we've seen this incredible increase in businesses and companies wanting to talk about neurodiversity in the workplace. I would say 50% of my job now is doing that. And there's a real interest. And it's like I'm Spartacus. I don't know how many of your listeners will will recognize that cultural reference. But every session that I deliver now,
Yeah.
you say, has anyone got experience of neurodiversity? And then all of these people popping up. I was
Yeah.
diagnosed as an adult, my child, my next door neighbor, it's the genie's out the bottle, it's
Yeah.
everywhere. And it's very exciting where we're heading with this. Can I just say, Georgina,
Yeah.
I'll say this, but if any of your listeners, if you're a parent or carer and your child's struggling, or you're a teacher, managing this, and maybe it's not going very well, I'm not diminishing any of the challenges that can come, and they've always been there, and they probably always will be. There'll be challenges for neurodiverse children, particularly in schools. But I'm 58, Georgina, and I just think, where are we heading with this? Where are
Yeah.
we going with this? I was in a university, Georgina, recently talking about how do we co-design with students assessment procedures right from the very start of their degree, right? Going right through their degree, and where we're going to assess them that in a way that matches their neurocognitive profile. How cool is
That is
that?
very
If
cool.
that is where we're heading in the
Absolutely.
future.
And it's so refreshing because I mean I completely understand of a guest point of view on this, and I'm with them. But there's a lot of problems currently with the SEND system that we know, and there's a lot of frustration, and it's quite refreshing. And I'm urging our listeners are feeling that as well, to have someone speak so positively at the moment as well about SEND and about neurodiversity and that side of things. And it's lovely to hear, like you said, about when you're going into schools, that things have changed in the last 5 years. People are being more positive, more embracing sort of understanding about neurodiversity. I think that's fantastic. So just tell us a little bit then about the ADHD Foundation itself. What are its aims? What does it do? Who does it help? How can people access it? Yeah, all about that, please.
Okay, great. Okay, so we started off about 15 years ago as a parent support group in Liverpool, and a group of parents got together and they said, we want more for our kids than just medication. Children with ADHD, they set up a charity. My CEO got involved, and then became the CEO, and then we've just taken it now into a whole range of different services. Our mission is to advocate for the neurodiverse community, to be a voice for them, and to provide services for neurodiverse people in different ways. We've made it a commitment, if you like, or a principle that we don't accept big contracts, big statutory contracts, which have been offered to us and are very attractive, because we want to be able to say what we want when we want it. We want to be able to be a voice. And sometimes, talking about the education system, as you've mentioned, Georgina, or the healthcare system, there are some challenging things to be said.
Yeah.
And so our charity is based on a range of traded services that we offer. We have a private clinic. We do in diagnoses, private diagnoses, assessment, pre-assessment, diagnosis, titration, and prescription and titration of medication. So the whole lot. We obviously do the training, and I run the training team, and we deliver training courses. And we have an early years team. We have 5 colleagues who specialise in what does neurodiversity look like in 0 to 5-year-olds, and how can we best support. We have a number of contracts where we're working in, for example, private nurseries and other early years settings to upskill the staff. And we have contracts, so the bulk of our staff are therapists and counsellors, and we have contracts with a number of schools in the northwest around Merseyside, where we provide them with a package of support. So training for the workforce, training for parents, but also our therapists who go in and work with children, one-to-one or teenagers. And we have a parenting division where we're offering support and information around parenting. We have our umbrella project. I don't know if anyone's aware of this, but we send stacks of multicolored umbrellas for people to use as public art installations. Why an umbrella? Well, because that's our logo, our symbol, because neurodiversity, as we know, or even ADHD, is an umbrella term that encompasses lots and lots of different things. I'm sure I've probably left some things out, Georgina. We run the biggest ADHD conference in the UK every year, and our conference is multidisciplinary. So we want doctors in the same room as head teachers to talk to each other. We've So there was something else. Sorry, Georgina, I've just stalled. Oh yes, sorry. And we are the secretariat for the all-party parliamentary group in Westminster on ADHD. So we want to be influencing national policy. We want a parliamentary act for ADHD, like they've got with autism. That's our one of our goals. But we want to be influencing the discussion and being involved in the discussion on a national level. So that's who we are.
Amazing, isn't it? Wow, you do more than I realised. I feel like I realised quite a fair bit of it, but you do more than I realised. It's fantastic. It really, really is. Right. So just in case someone is listening to this and thinking, right, I have an idea of ADHD, but I don't know fully what it means. I think it'd be really important to not like presume that people understand it. And I think there's a lot of myths around ADHD. Many people wrongly assume that it's just a child who's hyperactive, isn't it? When that's only hyperactivity and impulsivity is only one presentation of ADHD. So can you tell us more? What is ADHD, and how do children present with ADHD?
Okay, great. Well, how long have you got?
Well, yes, quite.
Okay. Because we could talk all day about this, couldn't we? I mean, just to try and be as succinct as possible for the purposes of this podcast. I think that it's obviously a neurodevelopmental condition that the NHS say affects 5% of the population, and it's rooted in differences in brain function, particularly around the transmission of dopamine within the brain. But what this leads to is a number of different features, and one of which I call, and I'm very passionate about this, is variable attention. The acronym ADHD, I don't know about you, Georgina, but I'm fed up of it. I really am. I think we're stuck with it.
Yeah.
Everybody knows what it is. It's too late to change, but it's really, it's really negative in the language that is used, because it's not an attention deficit. It's variable attention. Many of your listeners, I'm sure, will be familiar with hyperfocus. So this myth that children with ADHD can't pay attention, when they absolutely can pay attention when they are interested and engaged. And I like to say, particularly to parents, but also to education professionals, that actually that child's ability to hyperfocus could be an absolute asset to them in their lives. I mean, you probably know as well, Georgina, I know some amazing adults with ADHD who are thriving professionally because of that ability to hyperfocus, because it's linked directly to the level of interest and engagement. And this is challenging then, isn't it, for educational professionals? Because where does this lead us? We have to prioritize the interest and engagement of the child with ADHD, because then we start to see things like procrastination or distractibility when that interest and engagement isn't there. And that's one of the really challenging conversations. So that's one feature. That's the AD, if you like, of ADHD. Hyperactivity is fascinating to me, and it gets a bad press. Wriggly little boys that can't sit still, can't shut up. Excuse me, I've got a bit of a cold at the moment. But hyperactivity, comes in two ways. We have physical or motor hyperactivity. The body moves a lot, and some of the parents listening will absolutely recognize this. The child, doesn't sit still.
Yeah.
Not all, of course, but some. But one of my missions, Georgina, is absolutely to raise awareness of cognitive hyperactivity or internalized hyperactivity, where the mind is going very, very fast, as well as the body.
Interesting.
And one of the reasons, of course, why girls can be missed, although that is getting better. I know you want to talk about girls at some point, really, Georgina.
So they've got the hyperactivity in their thoughts, that their thoughts are rushing through their mind a bit faster than others, perhaps.
I was in a primary school in Preston a couple of months ago, and there was a teaching assistant there. She was in her 30s. She'd just been diagnosed, and she just started the medication. And she described it to me as voices in her head. She said, all my life, I've had this overlapping, continuous conversations going on in my head all day, every day.
Wow.
And of course, for her, that was completely normal, and she did the medication and it went. And she realized, but she said to me, which I've not forgotten, she said, when she was at school, it was all of her physical, cognitive, and emotional energy was just to focus on what that teacher was saying all day. And she said, never mind, she said, me making a contribution or what was going on around me. I was
Yeah.
wholly focused and really, really hard work, wholly focused on that teacher and just listening to the words, absolutely exhausting.
Oh
But
gosh, yeah, you
again,
can really imagine.
Georgina,
And like you
a
say, no
real
one would
asset.
know, would they? Like the teacher, it'd be very difficult for the teacher to realize that this child is all of that's going on in that child, especially if they're quiet and stereotypically a
Yeah.
girl quiet sat in the
They're
classroom,
masking it.
masking
Yeah,
it. Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah, and
Say,
I would say to teachers, go on, have a go, just talk to kids. Say what you're thinking about right now, what's in your head right now. Or I say, when was the last time you did an activity that was, you had a time limit on it, that it was about the fast generation of ideas. Come on, let's brainstorm something really quick. Kids with ADHD would thrive in situations like that. But where does that take you, Georgina? What are the opportunities of cognitive hyperactivity? It's no wonder, is it, we see so many people with ADHD in the creative industries, in sport, the ability to think visually, to make split-second decisions on the spot, the impulsivity, which we haven't talked about yet. Did you? I mean, I've been struck lately, Georgina. The number of stand-up comedians who've gone
yeah.
public about having ADHD.
And just in general,
Absolutely.
like people in the media, people in the press, people who are on TV as presenters, there seems to be a larger, well, I don't know how percentage wise, but there seems to be a lot more than we realize who've got ADHD. And I wonder
Yeah.
if that sort of performing and that side of things sort of, yeah, is a,
When I was a teacher, kids would come up to me. I've had an idea, sir, and you'd listen. You go, "Wow, wow, you're 12. That's amazing." Now, their ability to actually put the idea into practice is something that we can talk about. We talk about executive functioning, but the idea itself could be incredibly off the wall.
yeah,
Kids with ADHD, really good lateral thinkers, cognitive hyperactivity. Although obviously there can be real challenges in a
yeah,
school setting with this, but that again, that could be a real asset to that child
yeah,
in their life going forward if they're fortunate enough to get themselves into a professional context where those skills are valued.
yeah,
I would say what jobs for kids with ADHD? Lots of variety, pace, a bit of speed to it, an element of surprise, what you don't know what's going to happen that day, those more repetitive kind of jobs, absolutely not
yeah,
for kids with ADHD. So that's the hyperactivity. Then we've got impulsivity. Now, there's no kind of getting away from this. This can be challenging
yeah.
for children and young people if they're acting rashly without really thinking through the consequences. I taught a boy once, Georgina, no filter on his mouth. I spent so much time mediating between him and the rest of the class. He was in my form group for 5 years
Oh,
because he'd say something and upset somebody, and
just
this
seen it.
happened on a regular basis. Bless him, And but again, I just want to say, impulsivity gets a bad press
Yeah,
again, and it's not always a negative to be impulsive.
yeah,
Kids with ADHD will have a go if they're engaged. They'll
yeah,
get stuck in. They'll do something. They're not the child who's not putting their hand up, maybe. If they're engaged and interested, they will take action and have agency. And I think that's a really positive
yeah,
as well. So that leads us then to some of the other features of ADHD. And one of my other passions, Georgina, is memory
yeah,
and recognizing that all children who are neurodiverse, so it's not just ADHD, can struggle with their memory, especially their working memory.
yeah,
And I think I say this when I go into schools. I say, there's a whole number of reasons why a child might be having challenges in your classroom, which can present, as we both know, in lots of different ways. But one of them, and never forget this, is that they're walking into class thinking, I've forgotten what we did yesterday or the
yeah.
day before. And how much of teaching is teachers saying, do you remember yesterday?
Yeah,
Do you remember when we
literally. I
did
feel
this
like I said
before?
that every day when I was teaching. It is just, yeah. Do you remember when we did this? Remember? Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And they're
I mean,
already,
I always tell a story, Georgina, about when I started teaching and I taught Key Stage 3, and I'd see them for 1 hour a week. A
yeah,
whole week would go by, and I'd start every lesson,
I know.
Georgina, with a smile, saying, "Who can remember last week?"
No,
I was
nobody.
disabling kids with a
Yeah,
smile. The very first thing that I
yeah,
said, and I'm on a mission to kind of people to understand cue dependent memory, which really works with neurodiverse kids, providing those cues and not kind of thinking about memory as this big abstract, can you remember yesterday?
Yeah.
And it's a huge source of anxiety for children and young people. And then they're surrounded by kids whose hands shoot up, who remembered everything, and so I feel really quite passionate about that we raise that awareness
Yeah.
for people. I'm so pleased that retrieval practice now
Mhm.
is embedded fundamentally in so many schools, and this has got to be a good thing for children, all neurodiverse kids.
Yeah.
And then we have executive functioning, of course, which we should never forget. Your ability to plan and organise, and we see challenges here
Yeah.
with even very young children in early years settings who are struggling with executive functions. And so that, as well as that kind of emotional dysregulation and the anxiety that can come with having ADHD, but that's not ADHD, that's a byproduct of ADHD, if you like. But that wasn't very well phrased, was it? That's kind of an effect of
Yeah.
ADHD,
No,
if you like, or unsupported
yeah.
ADHD. And so that is ADHD, really. It's a fascinating neurocognitive profile. I
Yeah.
just find it endlessly interesting, and also massively comorbid with other conditions as well.
Yeah,
Sorry,
that's
Georgina, I
great.
will
No, that is
stop.
absolutely brilliant. Really, really interesting. Thank you. So, there's a lot of myths, isn't there, around ADHD? We spoke about people wrongly presuming it's just these hyperactive children. Like you said, a hyperactive boy, usually people presume sat in a classroom who can't sit still or at home can't sit still. But the other myth, and I think a lot of this has been, I think there's been a lot of awareness on this, which has been good, but people have previously presumed it was just boys and that girls didn't get ADHD, which is not the case. But is it just as common in girls as boys, or can you tell us a little bit about that?
I think so. I don't know if you've read recently, Georgina, and I still do. People writing ADHD is a condition that affects more boys than girls. I
Yeah.
read it just a couple of months ago, and
Oh,
I
wow.
can't believe that people are still writing
Yeah.
this. And I think, where we're heading with this is clear, isn't it? That there is no difference. There is no difference in the numbers. You look at diagnostic rates for adult women in the UK at the moment, which is equal to men, and you can see all those women coming to the realization they've got ADHD as
Yeah.
adults. Tell you what I love, Georgina, is on social media. You know, where you see parents and kids get their diagnosis on the same day,
Yeah.
and there's a photograph of them, and I just love those. So I think you're right. I think it is getting better. I was in Coventry recently. I was talking to an ADHD specialist nurse who said last year in Coventry, they diagnosed just slightly fewer girls than boys with ADHD. Now that's seismic, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
really
Massive.
significant because we have got quite a difference in the diagnostic rates. But one of the things I'm really interested in, because when I talk about this, people are very comfortable talking about masking and
Yeah.
talking about why girls mask, the pressure on girls to mask. I'm on a bit of a mission at the moment about what does boys masking look like?
That is such a
Are
good
we not
point.
talking about this enough? Anyway, that's another. But also, I think this whole discussion of ADD and ADHD, and I'm glad that we're moving away from
Yeah.
these two diagnoses. I'm glad that we're moving towards having this one diagnosis of ADHD, because what does hyperactivity look like in girls? This idea that the girls aren't hyperactive is wrong.
Yeah.
It's just that it's happening, in different ways.
Yeah.
Excessive talk, hypersociability, things like this. That she is hyperactive. She has got ADHD, and she's getting labelled as a chatterbox or a drama queen or
Yeah, being
ditzy, and
dramatic.
people aren't thinking
And
neurodiversity.
also, there's some children I know of like who might manage to mask in school in terms of not being hyperactive, but once they get home, they've got a lot of energy and they're cartwheeling around the living room and they're burning all that energy off then. So
Yeah.
it's just
Or,
sometimes at school aren't seeing the same thing as what home
yeah,
is seeing.
or having meltdowns.
Well, yes,
Being
absolutely.
significant. And I
Yeah,
breaks my heart when I talk to parents. And of course, I'm not a diagnostician. I
yeah,
can't diagnose. Not every parent's a pediatrician.
yeah,
But when you hear parents who say that I want to look for a diagnosis, I want to explore a diagnosis with my daughter, but the school won't support me because
uh,
they're saying they're
they're
not
fine.
seeing it.
Aren't they?
Now, I'm not saying that all parents are correct,
No, no,
but I'm really keen to say to schools, look beyond physical hyperactivity,
Yeah.
look beyond challenging behavior maybe,
Yeah.
and look at, attention span, look at memory, look at planning and organization, look at anxiety, if you really want to see if ADHD is there.
Yeah. I think that's so
Also, Georgina, can I just say something about some of the work that's going on around how ADHD impacts girls across the lifespan?
yeah.
And what is recognized now during puberty with the dysregulation of estrogen and the impact that has on dopamine, that
Hmm.
what we can see with some teenage girls is this almost very quick transition into a lot of emotional dysregulation and challenging behavior, because puberty can be a challenging time for girls with ADHD. Can I just say, if there's any of your listeners are interested in this,
Yeah.
there's a brilliant woman in the Netherlands who is pursuing this and researching this, and her name is Sandra Cooey. Great name.
Yeah.
K-O-O. I know you shouldn't spell out in an abstract way like this. K-O-O-I-J. Have a look at her films on YouTube if you're interested in this, especially if you've got a daughter with ADHD. And she's looking at, how does ADHD impact women, girls and women, right across the lifespan? So everything from pregnancy, menopause, the
I was
works.
going to say about menopause, because there has been again some like high profile celebrities saying that they didn't know, they women who didn't realize they had ADHD until they hit sort of perimenopause and menopause, and then they were aware. So it's interesting, really interesting to hear about puberty as well and the impact of that. And it makes complete sense, doesn't it? If it's
Yeah.
hormones can exacerbate.
I've lost count of the head teachers who I've spoken to who've talked to me about very challenging young women and saying, we don't know, this has it's just happened.
It
We don't
happened.
know where it's come from. She wasn't
Yeah.
like this before. There's no change to her environment or her family, or no
Yeah.
adverse child experiences that we know of, right? And we're seeing this very different presentation in this child. If she's got ADHD, it could be that she's going through puberty, increasing the risk of postnatal depression for women
Yeah.
with ADHD as well. So that's another area that
That's really
we're
interesting.
just
We could
really
do a whole
beginning to
podcast
get to
on that,
grips.
couldn't we? 'Cause
Yeah,
that's a whole.
absolutely.
Just
Um,
thinking, if there's somebody listening now who that's really resonating with, maybe it's a teacher or a parent of a girl who's changed, suddenly changed, and they think it could be to do with puberty and to do with ADHD. Is there anything they can be doing to help? Like, what can they do?
well, it's a number of things, isn't there, that in terms of um, looking after how girls manage their anxiety levels.
Yeah,
I mean, I'm sure your listeners are familiar with some of the mental health
yeah,
vulnerabilities that can that there can be for all children with ADHD, but particularly for girls and young women. A lot of young women, teenagers, who are fortunate enough to get an ADHD diagnosis in their childhood is usually because they've presented with other things as
yeah,
teenagers, anxiety, eating disorders, self-harming behaviors, for example. So it's watching out for them. It's watching out for her anxiety levels generally, and how do I help my daughter to self-calm and self-soothe. I get quite concerned about the perfectionism that some girls can
yeah,
experience. This hothouse we've created in education over the last, 15 years, maybe longer, where you've got to get everything right. And that needs to be, awareness needs to be raised on this. We need to create a culture, don't we, of mistakability in education, where it's okay. And actually making mistakes is some of the best learning points that you have as a child or a young person. So we need to make that. And also, I think with parents and carers, it's just understanding, isn't it, that this could be undiagnosed neurodiversity. Is about keeping the conversation going with
yeah,
schools so that they are aware of it. I've said to lots of parents, I'm sure you have, Georgina, get the diagnostic criteria, take it into the school, go through every single one that you think your daughter is affected by, and really push,
yeah,
that school to say, my daughter, I think, is neurodiverse. Are you seeing any of those things? So there's a number of things that we can do, isn't it, about helping and protecting, and also that exercise is key for ADHD. Protein-based diets, because kids will crave sugar with ADHD, because it'll give them a dopamine lift. Sleep. Can I just recommend to everyone the Sleep Charity in Sheffield? Brilliant organisation if you're interested in sleep. Got a great profile for neurodiversity, that charity. So all of those things that can be impacted by ADHD as well.
Gosh, yeah. And so if they think they've got a child who's got ADHD, either in school or at home, how do they get a diagnosis? What's the first step? What do they do?
Well, that depends where you live. So different parts of the UK have different systems, if you like, or different processes. The information about that should come from your SENCO. Your SENCO should know what the process is. If you're really struggling, we've got the ICBs in every area. Go to their website, because they're the people that commission the services and set up the services. So they will have a website for your area where you find out what the ADHD pathway is. But generally speaking, it depends. In some parts of the UK, it goes through CAMS. In some parts, it goes through the school. Some places, it can go through your GP, can refer people. So it's finding that out, isn't it? And what I would say, absolutely, is start as soon as you can. And don't spend any money privately without speaking to your GP and or to the school, because private diagnoses, your GP, if you want to, for example, pursue medication, if you want to do that for your child, or the school, are under no legal obligation to accept a private diagnosis. So I've heard lots of stories of people who've spent a lot of money then to be told, we don't recognise this. So check that out first. Check out the credentials of the private provider. So if you want to say, for example, if it's NHS staff who are doing a bit of private work, then at least we know that they're legitimate then. And so do that. I would recommend. But, have the meeting with the SENCO, keep the relationship with the school going. As frustrating as both sides can be at times, if the relationship breaks down, it's the child who loses in that. And so, it's gathering that information, finding out what it is. So, for example, ADHD, finding out what the diagnostic criteria are, and then really thinking about your child. Are we seeing this? Has it always been there? Is it consistent? And then talking to the school openly about that and having that conversation, because the school being on side is critical to this process. So, you will get the referral, and then, of course, you'll go on the waiting list. And let's not get into that, Georgina, and just depress all of your listeners. And then you're on the waiting list. And then the paediatrician, remember that only a specialist paediatrician can diagnose your child as with ADHD. And so he or she will gather that evidence, will use whatever screening tools or health technology they have in that clinic, and they will come to a determination about whether your child has got ADHD or not. And that's the process. So first of all, find out what the pathway is in your area. And your SENCO is the best person to do that, help you with that.
And if they get diagnosed with it, and parents are looking down the sort of medication route, what are these medications? What medications can children who've got ADHD be prescribed, and how do they help? I know you mentioned about, for that one example you had with that lady, that sort of quieting down that hyperactivity, but what else can it do, and what are these medications?
Okay, so there are two types of ADHD medications. There are stimulant and non-stimulant medication. The paediatrician will decide which of those to prescribe the child based on the medical history that they take of the child. But ADHD medications are cognitive enhancers. So it will put you in a position where it helps with the transmission of dopamine in the brain. It stops dopamine being sucked out of the brain. And so they'll put you in a position to be less impulsive, more attentive. They are not cure-all pills. This is the thing. I mean, I don't know about you, Georgina, but I've seen kids turned around on medication. I
Yeah,
really have.
I've
Risk of
seen them when they've not
exclusion.
got their medication as well, and the impact, when they've been on it for a while and then there's been a shortage potentially, which I know is something I was going to touch about, or when they've not had the medication and the impact you see and the difference in the behaviour that way as well.
Yes, absolutely. And research would suggest that it doesn't work for 1 in 5.
Oh,
So,
wow.
don't think that that's contentious. Don't think that it's necessarily going to cure everything. If your child, or if the child, sorry, has cardiac issues or respiratory problems or growth deficits, they wouldn't be prescribed
Wow.
stimulant medication
Yeah.
for ADHD. So a number of health conditions rule it out.
Yeah.
And so then, as I said, they are cognitive enhancers. There are side effects to the medication.
Yeah.
It can, in some cases, take a long time to get the titration right.
Yeah.
So, manage, if you're a Senko or a teacher, manage that family's expectations and say it might be a few months before we get it right. As the child grows, their medication is going to have to be constantly reviewed and the dosage be reviewed. So it is an ongoing process. But some of the side effects are, and they can be significant for children. One is, we're talking stimulant medications, and therefore that can exacerbate sleep problems that might already be there. A lot of kids are prescribed melatonin, of course,
Yeah.
alongside their ADHD meds to help with sleep, and also appetite suppression. I was reading, Georgina, recently, 15% of parents take their kids off ADHD medication in the first 4 months
Wow.
because they see the weight loss and they go, we don't want this.
Yeah.
So those are the two major side effects. A very, very minority of children might experience nightmares and night terrors
Yeah.
on it. And so I would say, and I'm not here to sell drugs, and I don't work for a pharmaceutical company. I would say to any family, give it a go.
Yeah.
Try it. It's always going to be there for your child for the rest of their life, right? As a possible, give it a go. If you don't like it, then there's no lasting side effects. If you take
Yeah.
your child off it, there are side effects when the child is on it. And so, do that. I always remember this boy. Georgina, he hated them. He hated the medication, and his last A-level exam, there was a ritual where he ripped up all the packets in the bin and all his friends, and I was stood there, and it was this ritual of I've promised me mum I'd take them until my final exam, and then he
Exams are
ripped
done.
them
I don't
all up
need
and
to
put
do
them in
it.
the bin. A lot. If you're working in a secondary school or you're a parent of a teenager and you're having problems with getting them to take the
Yeah.
medication, don't beat yourself up because it's very common.
Yeah.
Adolescence is a time when you become really self-conscious.
Yeah.
And then if you
You
don't
lose
feel
control.
yourself, which is a lot of what teenagers say, a lot of teenagers will have challenges with it, but it will always be there for the rest of that person's life as a
That's a
possible
really good point.
support for
Yeah,
ADHD.
it's
Give it
not
a
just
go.
children with ADHD, they become adults with ADHD, don't they? So yeah, like you say, it's there for them the whole time. And I
My
think,
Georgina, my husband was in his mid-50s when he started the medication.
oh my
For
goodness,
years and years, he said, I'm not going to do this. I don't
yeah,
need medication, right? I can manage this. And then within 2, 3 weeks, he was saying, why did I not do this? Why did I not do
really
this
wish
years
they'd done
ago?
it
And
sooner.
I'm not saying that to say that it's, as I mentioned before, they're not, cure-alls. The child's not going to suddenly be able to do everything in the classroom just because they've had the medications. But there are opportunities within it that can really work for some people.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. That's really interesting. One thing that someone said to me, and I've not told you this is what I wanted to ask you, Colin. So I'm throwing you a bit of a curveball here. But someone who I spoke to who has ADHD as an adult said for them, having a cup of coffee really helps them. And I found that as a very, and even at night time. So if I have a cup of coffee at any time past 12 o'clock, I can't sleep. It's I think coffee works like that for a lot of people. But I've heard for some people with ADHD, if they have a cup of coffee before bed, it can actually help them sleep. Is that true?
Yeah, it's about dopamine levels.
Yeah.
So it's the impact of caffeine, isn't it? And it's bringing dopamine levels up to,
Mm.
where I assume neurotypical people's levels are. So it can make people feel calmer. I was in a sixth form college in Wigan, Georgina, a couple of years ago, and they were telling me about a group of young men, 16 to 19, all with ADHD, drinking those energy drinks,
Yep.
half a dozen teaspoons
Oh,
full of
God.
sugar all day. And
Oh,
when they said to them, "Why are you drinking all of this sugar?" they said, "Because it makes me feel calmer." And neurologically, they're absolutely right, of course.
wow.
But of
Yeah.
course, it's
It's not
not a
great.
good
Yeah. We should.
idea
Yeah.
to consume that amount of sugar. So it might be that people do feel calmer as a result. And then in the case of the person might
Mm.
actually be helping them to get to sleep. It's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, it's
How it
absolutely
works.
fascinating. Really fascinating. Yeah. And I'm aware I've taken up a lot of time asking things, so I won't ask you too many more questions. But I feel like I could talk to you all day about this, Colin. I would love to. I was thinking about, we talked about celebrities and we talked about people in the press and there's been, as well as people who've said, oh, I've now found out I've got ADHD, for example, there's also people in the press who've been making comments about ADHD. There was Joe Frost a little while ago talking about screens and ADHD. There was Joe Wicks, I think, got in trouble talking about processed food and links with ADHD. What are your thoughts on this? And is it undoing, I think we know the answer to this, is it undoing some of the work people like yourselves in the ADHD Foundation are doing on raising understanding of ADHD?
Yeah, yeah, to an extent. I mean, I don't want to overplay this, but I think with any change, isn't there? With any kind of development or social change, there's always a bit of a kickback, isn't there? There's
Yeah.
always people who, and I think what we saw particularly in the run up to the election this year was that in some parts of the press, neurodiversity is almost being brought into this kind of anti-woke agenda. So
Yeah.
we've got all these people saying that they're neurodiverse now when they're just, benefits grounders, or, we have the Equality Act and people have got reasonable adjustments, and that means people can do less work or slower or whatever, and they can get away with it and so I think it's all of that
Yeah.
is happening, which isn't helping. And some of these myths around processed foods or with lead exposure to lead. Remember that
Oh,
all that? And
yeah.
when I started 10 years ago, there was a lot of talk about smoking and drinking alcohol during pregnancy caused neurodiversity, and
Gosh.
then that has all been roundly
Yeah.
discredited now. So I think we are seeing a degree of pushback. We
Good.
are, and we're seeing people kind of trying to move neurodiversity into, for their own political agendas. I personally think, Georgina, it's too late. I think the genie is out the bottle.
Yeah.
There are so many people now who are diagnosed as neurodiverse. It's getting bigger and bigger every year. People are much more comfortable in talking about it. Do you ever do this, Georgina, when I deliver training? I say, does anybody know anybody who's neurodiverse? Right.
Mm.
And it's very rare, isn't it, that you sometimes get one or two individuals whose hand doesn't go up. Is that everybody knows that we live in a world where people have a variety of neurocognitive profiles,
Yeah.
and it's fine, it's okay, and it's normal, and it's nobody's fault, and we we reconfigure the workplace, we reconfigure education and assessment. That's the journey that we're on to best meet the needs of those people. And so I think that these voices about naughty kids and rubbish parents and benefits grounders, I think that's just going to get smaller and smaller and smaller, just because of people's lived experience
Yeah.
of knowing neurodiverse people
Yeah.
and experiencing it for themselves. And
Yeah.
what I get a little bit worried about, Georgina, is maybe this is another podcast, but is the idea that we're all on a spectrum. I think that
Yeah.
needs
I've
to be
seen a bit of
challenged.
this and I'm not,
Yeah, because I don't think we are.
no.
And I think that needs and I'm very keen when I deliver training to clarify this.
Yeah.
Just because you might struggle to focus now in this session doesn't mean you've got ADHD.
Yeah.
Just because you've had difficulty making yourself understood, or on communication at times, doesn't make you autistic. And I think we need to keep challenging that. I think the spectrum is bigger. than we thought it was,
Yeah.
right? But I don't think we're all on it, and it's making that really clear to people that I think is important.
Yeah. And last question then, because there's been, like we said in the media as well, there's been people saying that ADHD is being overdiagnosed. How would you respond to that?
Oh, absolutely not. It's not. And if you just look at diagnostic rates, you just look at the diagnostic rates for adults with ADHD, and particularly women, but also lots of men getting their diagnosis as an adult. And if you look at those figures, there's no way that you can argue that ADHD is overdiagnosed, because we miss children, particularly in primary schools, particularly girls. We miss so many of them. And if you think, I was reading recently, the average age of diagnosis for a girl is 17, 18. How can you argue that
Well,
it's overdiagnosed? I read, and I'm not sure that I believe this, but I read an article the other day that said 75% of neurodiverse women are undiagnosed currently. Now, I think that sounds high for me. I've read other research that
yeah.
talks about 40, 50, 60%, which feels I'm a bit more comfortable with. But we know that there are a lot of neurodiverse people out there as adults living their lives who are currently undiagnosed and may not even know that they are neurodiverse. So I don't know how, when you look at the figures, I don't know how you can argue that ADHD is overdiagnosed.
I agree. Brilliant. Thank you so much, Colin. You've been an amazing guest, and I feel really excited about ADHD, listening to your passion about it. You're clearly very, very passionate about ADHD, about the research around it, about supporting children and young people. It's really lovely to hear, and it's been such a refreshing.
It's been a pleasure, Georgina.
Yes. Thank you so
for
much
having me.